Joe had texted me over the weekend. We texted a little bit back and forth, and one of the texts is, what is the requirement for, do I wear a robe? Do I wear a jacket and a tie? What do we wear? So I think, and Joe said, it looks like we do things pretty much the same. This is the standard disciples uniform, if you didn't know. We've got the khaki pants and blazer. But in any case, we also do, and this is just to let you know, we preach typically out of the lectionary text. And we're doing that again. This is the gospel lectionary for today from Matthew in chapter 10. And we're just doing these 4 verses 28 through 31. This is part of a long teaching of Jesus, and we're following, from something we also looked at last week. But this is the teaching that's so familiar, where Jesus says, "Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And yet not one of them will fall to the ground unperceived by your Father. And even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows." Have we heard that one before? Thanks be to God this day. The message, the very red-letter words of Jesus. Thanks be to God. And there's something that we all are familiar with this scene. This is the scene from, it's one of the movies, I think it's the Christmas movie of Charlie Brown, but you've seen Lucy, right, in her little booth, where it's her little psychiatric booth. And so picture this scene. We've all seen it before. Charlie Brown comes in and he walks up to that booth of Lucy's and he plunks down his nickel on the table and he plops right down in the chair and he says, "I'm depressed." He says, "It's Christmas time and I know I should be feeling something more, but I'm just not feeling it. Lucy, tell me what to do." And so Lucy cracks open her book of all the phobias, DSM, I guess you call it. She's going through and she's saying, is this, because it's finding the problem is the first step, of course, to finding a solution. And I've never been able to do this. The problem I have is with the names of the phobias. I'm going to grab my cheat sheet here, because she said, this is what she says. She says, "Are you afraid of responsibility?" She asked, if you are, then you have hypengyophobia. Now, I don't think that's quite it, says Charlie Brown. "Well, then how about cats?" She says, "Are you afraid of cats? So you have Eleurosphasia." Is that right? Greek, you know the Greek better than that. "Well, sort of," says Charlie Brown, "but I'm not sure." It says, "Are you afraid of staircases?" asked Lucy. "If so, you have climacophobia. Or maybe you have thalassophobia, which is the fear of the ocean, or gephorobia, which is the fear of crossing bridges. Or maybe you have pantophobia." She says, "Do you think you have pantophobia?" "Well, what's pantophobia?" says Charlie Brown. "The fear of everything," says Lucy. "That's it," says Charlie Brown. And of course, all of us can relate, right? Because we all of us struggle with fear. Some kind or another of fear, right, is something that is basic to who we are as human beings. It's intrinsic to our human condition. Right? Some of us are studying in the book of Genesis and the Wednesday Bible study that we're doing we've done this over this whole past year. So we got to look back, that you might remember that way back in the very beginning of the Bible, that fear was the first emotion, the first negative emotion that we see from human beings. Right back in Genesis in chapter 3, you remember Adam and Eve had sinned and done wrong, and then God comes looking for them in the garden, and God says to Adam, He says, "Where are you?" And Adam says, "I'm hiding because I'm naked and I'm afraid." So you see, fear is intrinsic to who we are somehow as human beings. It's part of being in flesh. It's part of our biological makeup. And just like Lucy says, there's all numerous different kinds of fears or phobias, as they're called when they're clinically diagnosed. Nikki was touching on some of this in her children's sermon today. In fact, a lot of people have a fear of flying, right? Or a fear of heights, which I think, we know God promises that, "Lo, I will be with you always." So I don't know if that's a bad joke. But, or Nikki mentioned also the fear of spiders, right? Or the fear of snakes. It says that the fear of snakes is second only to the fear of public speaking, which is the fear of public speaking is, of course, the top #1 fear for people in these United States. Did you know that people fear public speaking, spiders, and snakes more than they fear their own death? Can you imagine? Right? Of course, death is also on that list of fears, as is illness and loneliness and poverty and all of these different things. Of course, there's a whole category of minor fears that are anxieties and worries that we have, things that we just manufacture in our minds, right? But nonetheless, they still have a debilitating effect on us as human beings. But that's why Jesus offers us this prescription, right? It's a remedy. It's a remedy for the illness that is the intrinsic illness of human beings. And he says, do not be afraid. Nikki touched on this. That phrase, do not be afraid, is written 365 times exactly in this Bible. Can you believe that? You know, almost every time the angels appear, for instance, that's the first thing that they say. They say, do not be afraid. But you see how when it's written, I like this. I say when it's written 365 times in the Bible, we can think that's a daily reminder to us to live day by day, fearless, not afraid. So God tells us, God says you can trust in the Lord. God says there's nothing to worry about. Cast all of your cares on Jesus. Right? And so how is it then that we don't get it? Right? This message is there so many times in the Bible, 365 times there. Once for every day we have this message. You know, you put it up there on the mirror and it's right there for you every single day. Right? But we still don't get it, do we? What's the problem? It reminds me of that story about a man who had an operation, and he'd gone into the operating theater, and he was there, and his wife was out there and waiting in the waiting room, and then all of a sudden she sees her husband bolted out of that operating room. And he's got his hospital gown on, and the backup is just flapping in the breeze. And he runs into the operating room, and his wife says, what's going on? How come you ran out of there so fast? And he says, well, it's because of what the nurse was saying. And he says, well, what's the nurse saying? And she's saying, well, don't be afraid. Relax. It's really a simple procedure. And she said, well, why couldn't you relax? And he says, well, she wasn't talking to me. She was talking to the doctor. But the point is that God may say this to us, right? Again, 365 times, but do we hear it as being for ourselves? Right? Do we hear it as a message for you and me? Is it a message that we embrace, that we take, or is this just some kind of historic artifact, some kind of relic of the past? Or do we take this to heart? Is it really true that God is in control? That we can cast our cares on God and Jesus Christ? Is that true for you and for me? Right? We've got to believe it. We have a part in it too. And you know what? I'm reminded of this past week, that I had some trouble because you've even heard me say in the Bible study that I feel like God is removing some of this worry from me that I've struggled with. But you know what? This past week, it tripped me up again. We had a birthday party for our little girl on 6 years old, and her birthday party on Saturday, and we scheduled it to be at the park. Well, what happened? This past week, well, not only we got up to 100 and something degrees, and then it's one of those Colorado things I still haven't got used to. But it shifts from 100 degrees to 50 degrees from one day to the next. And it rains, and so I start to panic, and I think, well, are we going to be able to have this birthday party? And even more so, we don't get the RSVPs that we were hoping to get. I think some of these other parents are gaming the weather just like we are to decide whether they're going to come to the party. So I start to get anxious. I start to think about, is there a plan B? Do we just need to cancel it? Do we need to postpone it? Right? Do we need to hold it at our house? Now that would be a lot of work. And so I start to think about all these things, and then you come finally to the day, to Saturday, and the weather it all turns out. Nikki gets there early, and she gets the table set up. And so I'm starting to relax. We got some RSVPs coming in right at the last minute, and then lo and behold, Nikki gets there, and she texts me. She says, there's a real fancy party setting up. So I guess what happens again, the wheel starts to turn again. And I start to think, and then I get there and I bring the kids and I see these people who've got streamers, and they've got balloons, and they've got a 3-tiered cake, and they got all these things, they got costume, games. And I start to panic again. Do we have enough food? I didn't think we were going to have enough people there. Now I'm thinking, do we have enough food? Do we have games? Do I need to run out and get some games? And guess what? All our people came. They had a good time. They played. We have plenty of food. The kids were in a park, right? The kids have got plenty of things to do. I didn't have anything to be worried about, right? And you know what? I look over and I see this family that does all these things. And their kids are all playing on the playground. They don't even touch those games that they had set out, right? What is it that I'm worried about? But what it made me think is that I tend, even though I'm a pastor, right? I should know better. But I have this tendency, it's almost like it's a habit, It's almost like it's a habit to worry and to kind of stroke these worries. Have you ever, is this just me, or have you ever had this experience? In fact, I was reading, and there's a new research. The neuroscientists have come out with a new research. Let's see if I kept up with my slide. Yeah, it says that in fact that these worries, to worry, to heap guilt and shame on ourselves, you're actually touching the pleasure centers in your brain. It says that there's a kind of a feedback loop, and it says that it touches the amygdala and the cerebral cortex. It's almost like you've got buttons there, and it pushes these buttons, and it gives you a feeling that you're looking for, right? It's actually so we actually like to feel, to worry, to spin that wheel, to stroke our guilt and our shame, just to heap that guilt and shame on. If you worry, at least you think that your mind thinks that it's doing something about the problem, right? So you're actually doing this, we're doing this to ourselves, we're choosing to do this, right? And but the fact is, in the final analysis, it might feel good for a moment, but worry and guilt and shame are not long-term solutions to our problems. The same doctors, the same neuroscientists look at gratitude as an emotion, did you know this? And said that gratitude is a natural antidepressant, just like Wellbutrin. It increases the dopamine, just like Prozac. It increases the serotonin, but without the side effects. So God has given us the prescription. God has given us the prescription to make a change. You see, and it can be true. Each of us, we can choose for each and every one of us how we want to think. And how we can start is we can start with gratitude. You ever heard about the tool of the gratitude list? And I challenge you, if there's something that's getting you down, start in the morning with 10 things. And I've never seen it not happen. To go through a list of 10 things to be thankful for. And it can change your perspective. It's kind of like what Jesus said, isn't it? Jesus said, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny?" He says, and yet God cares for them. He says, "Is not every hair on your hair counted? And how much more does God care for each and every one of you? So do not be afraid." You see, Jesus is saying the same thing, isn't he? He's saying, look at all of these things that God does, and don't take it for granted. Amen? Don't take it for granted. If God cares so much for these, does not God care also as much for you and for me? Kind of like the sparrows, right? You know what he's talking about? The sparrows. We go down to Florida every year, and we see these sparrows by the hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands. They say the largest colonies of these sparrows are tens of thousands. And God cares so much for these common things. How much more does God care for each and every one of us unique? A masterpiece. Amen. It's kind of like that song, the song, "His eye is on the sparrow. His eye is on the sparrow. And I know he watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. Because his eye is on the sparrow. And I know he watches me." And likewise, the hairs on our head, some of them counted in the 10,000, some of them not so much. But in any case, that's what you're talking about. It's, this is, God cares so much for even these little things. How much more does God care for us? As the truth of the promises, that we don't have to be afraid. And it reminds me, though, that we have a part. We've got to hear this message, don't we? Reminds me, and with this I'll close, there is a story about a man who had a dream, and he was dreaming that he was sitting out in the ocean in a rowboat, and he looked down and he sees he's by himself, and he looks down And he sees the oars lying right there at his feet. And then he looks around him and he sees that there's a whole host of other people. And they're going places in their little rowboats all around him. They're going towards the goal. But yet he's just sitting there adrift, not going anywhere. And then he hears a voice from heaven. And the voice says, "How you doing?" And he says back to the voice, he says, "Well, I feel like I'm adrift." And the voice says back to him, "Well, look down at your feet." And then it says, and remember this, always remember, God doesn't row. Amen? I mean, what does that say? It is saying that even if God is telling us not to be afraid 365 times in the Bible, our job is to hear it as applying to we ourselves. This isn't just, again, something out of history. This is a message for you and for me. This is a message that can apply to our lives in the day by day. And our job is to understand it. Our job is to absorb it. And then our job is to tell it. Right? To tell it to our children, to our children's children, to the people that we meet each day. And you know what? Let me tell you a secret. The way that we keep it is to give it away. Right? So whether you are afraid of heights or spiders or snakes, or whether you've got the pantophobia like Charlie Brown, the message is the same for all of us. Do not be afraid, because you are of more value than many, many sparrows. Isn't that a message that's healing? Isn't that a message that's necessary for a hurting world, for people who question their own value and worth? And our job is to teach it. Our job is to give it away, to teach the good news, to do not be afraid, to tell the world that God so loved the world that God gave His only Son, that whosoever believes shall not perish and shall have eternal life. That's the good news in Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God this day.